The first thing you need to understand is that I wasn't alone up there because I wanted to be. I was alone up there because the district had 16 towers, and 11 of them were automated by 2019, and the 5 remaining staff positions went to people with seniority, or people willing to take the worst postings. I had no seniority. I'd been with the Forest Service for 14 months, most of that spent doing fuels reduction work along highway corridors, cutting brush, stacking slash, eating dust 8 hours a day while seasonal employees, half my age, outworked me and never seemed tired. My name is Colin Ware. I was 34. I'd been a high school math teacher for 6 years before I quit, and the reasons I quit aren't important to the story, except to say that I didn't leave teaching because I hated it. I left because the building I was inside every day started to feel like it was metabolizing me. I'd stand at the whiteboard explaining polynomial functions to 28 kids who were looking at their phones, and I could feel myself becoming thinner. Not physically, existentially. Like I was being digested by fluorescent lighting and industrial carpet and the particular smell of a classroom at 2:15 in the afternoon. I know that sounds dramatic. It wasn't dramatic at the time. It was just Tuesday every week for 6 years. So I quit. And I took the Forest Service job because I thought distance from people would feel like health. For a while it did. The tower assignment came in late June. My supervisor, a woman named Deb Kenner, who had been running fire operations in the district for 22 years, called me into the district office in Mitchell, a small cinder block building that smelled permanently of coffee and copy toner, and told me they needed someone at Spruce Knob Tower for the season. July through mid-October, weather depending. She said it casually, the way you'd offer someone the last donut. Spruce Knob was the bad one. Everyone in the district knew that. Not because of the tower itself. It was a standard 60-foot steel frame structure built in 1962 with a 7x7 cab on top and an Osborne firefinder bolted to the center table. It was the location. The tower sat on a bald ridge at the end of a 9-mile dirt road that washed out every spring and sometimes didn't get regraded until August. The nearest staff facility was the Elk Creek Ranger Station, 31 miles by road, about 14 as the crow flies. Cell service was non-existent. You had a radio and a landline that worked when the line wasn't down, which was about 60% of the time. I said yes. Deb looked at me for a moment longer than was comfortable, then nodded and handed me a manila folder with the tower manual, a supply list, and a photocopied map with the road highlighted in yellow. I drove up on July 3rd. The road was as bad as advertised, rutted red clay with exposed rock shelves that scraped the undercarriage of the government trucks so hard I could feel it in my teeth. The last 2 miles climbed steeply through a corridor of spruce, so dense and uniform it felt architectural, like driving through a hallway. Then the trees stopped, and the ridge opened up, and there it was. The tower looked exactly like every fire lookout tower you've ever seen in a photograph. Steel legs, wooden stairs zigzagging up in switchbacks with small landings at each turn, a cab on top with windows on all 4 sides and a catwalk around the outside, an American flag on a short pole, faded almost white. Below the tower, a small equipment shed and an outhouse. That was everything. I spent the first 3 days getting settled. The cab was livable, a cot against the east wall, a propane stove, a small table, shelves with field guides and topo maps, the firefinder in the center. The windows gave you a 360-degree view of the surrounding ridges and valleys, an unbroken carpet of green and dark green and blue-green stretching to the horizon in every direction. At night, with no light pollution for 40 miles, the stars were so dense they looked like a physical substance, like you could reach up and feel the texture of them. I want to be honest about something. I loved it. Those first weeks, I loved it in a way that felt almost medical, like a deficiency being corrected. I'd wake up at 5:30 with the sun coming through the east windows, and I'd lie on the cot and listen to the wind moving through the spruce below and feel nothing wrong anywhere. The work was simple and repetitive in a way that soothed me. Scan the horizon every 30 minutes during daylight, log weather observations at set intervals, report anything that looked like smoke. Between scans I did crossword puzzles, I watched hawks circle the thermals below the ridge. I talked to Deb on the radio at 8 a.m. and 5 p.m., and occasionally to other tower operators on adjacent ridges, though the nearest one, a man named Glenn at Dalisad's tower, was 19 miles east, and we mostly just confirmed we were both alive. I should also be honest about this. I was not a person with a lot of practice at being happy. The 6 years of teaching had left something calcified inside me. My marriage had ended 2 years before the tower, quietly and without the dramatic collapse people seem to expect when you tell them. Rachel and I just stopped being able to reach each other. She said once, near the end, that talking to me was like trying to have a conversation with someone on the other side of a window. I think she was right. I think the window was already there when she married me, and I just didn't know it yet. The point is, I wasn't someone who trusted good feelings. So when the tower made me feel good, I was waiting for the correction. I just didn't expect it to come from below. The first night it happened was July 19th. I know the exact date because I'd started keeping a journal, not because the job required it, but because the silence had started producing a low-grade need to talk to someone, and the journal was the only option after 5 p.m. when the radio check-ins ended. I'd written that evening about a red-tailed hawk I'd been watching for 3 days, how it seemed to have a preferred thermal column about a quarter mile south of the tower, and returned to it every afternoon at roughly the same time. I went to bed around the 10. Sleep at the tower was different from sleep anywhere else I'd ever lived. The wind was constant, not violent but present, a low, steady push against the cab that made the whole structure sway almost imperceptibly. You could feel it in the cot, a rhythm, like the tower was breathing. I'd gotten used to it quickly and actually found it difficult to sleep without it on the rare still nights. That night, the wind was steady, maybe 12 to 15 miles per hour from the west. I fell asleep easily. And then I woke up. It was 2:47 a.m. I know, because the first thing I did was look at my watch, which I kept on the shelf next to the cot with the dial facing me so I could read it without reaching for it. I lay there for a moment trying to understand what had woken me. The wind was still blowing. The tower was still swaying gently. Everything sounded normal. Then I heard it. A metallic sound from below. Not loud, not sharp. A kind of tonal creak, like stress being applied to steel slowly enough that the metal could sing about it before it settled. It came from the stairs, specifically from the lower portion of the stairs, the first switchback, maybe 15 feet off the ground. I want to be precise about what I felt in that moment, because later it became important to me that I remembered accurately. I was not afraid. I was confused. The tower stairs were steel grating bolted to steel stringers, and they made noise constantly. Thermal expansion during the day, contraction at night, ice in the winter. The structure talked. That was normal. But this sound had a rhythm to it. Not mechanical, not wind-driven. It was the sound of weight being transferred from one step to the next. Something was on the stairs. I sat up slowly and reached for the flashlight I kept next to the cot. A heavy mag light, the kind that doubles as a club if you need it to. I didn't turn it on. Instead, I moved to the north window, the side where the stairs reached the catwalk, and looked down. Moonlight, almost full, bright enough to cast shadows from the tower legs across the bare rock of the ridge. I could see the stairs clearly, the zigzag pattern of the switchbacks descending into shadow, where the structure met the ground. The first landing, the second, the steps between them. Nothing was there. I stood at the window for probably 5 minutes, scanning every section of the staircase I could see. The sound had stopped. The wind blew. The tower swayed. A bat crossed the moonlight and disappeared. I went back to bed. I wrote in the journal the next morning. Woke at 2:47, noise on stairs. Probably thermal. Nothing visible. I underlined probably, and then felt foolish about it and didn't think about it again for 3 days. On July 22nd, it happened again. Same time. Not approximately the same time, the same time. 2:47. I woke and looked at my watch, and the minute hand was touching the same mark it had touched 3 nights before. And the sound was there. The same slow metallic singing from the stairs, but this time it was higher. Not the first switchback, the second, maybe 25 or 30 feet up. This time I was afraid. Not of what was making the sound. I still didn't know what that was. And fear of the unknown is a different chemical than what I felt. I was afraid of the precision, the sameness, the fact that my body had woken at exactly the right moment to hear it, as if the sound and my waking were synchronized, as if something in me was listening even while I slept. I went to the north window again, flashlight in hand this time, turned on, the beam cutting down through the dark at the stairs. The stairs were empty. Every step, every landing, every railing. Empty. The beam reached the ground and lit up the bare rock in the first few feet of the trail that led to the equipment shed. Nothing. No animal, no person, no evidence of anything. But the sound continued for another 4 or 5 seconds after I turned the light on. I heard it. Weight on steel. Ascending. And then it stopped. Not abruptly, but gradually, like someone slowing down and then standing still. I am not a superstitious person. I was a math teacher. I believe in quantifiable explanations, and I am comfortable with the idea that some things have explanations I simply don't have access to yet. So, the next morning, I went down the stairs myself, all 60 feet, and inspected every step, every bolt, every connection point. I looked for animal signs, scat, hair, claw marks on the steel grating. Bears climb, raccoons climb, porcupines will climb anything. I found nothing. The stairs were clean. The ground around the base of the tower showed no tracks in the thin soil between the rocks. I radioed Deb at the morning check-in and mentioned it casually. Strange noises at night. Probably just the tower settling. There was a pause before she responded. Not a long pause, maybe 2 seconds, but Deb was a fast talker, a person who responded to radio transmissions the way a tennis player returns a serve, immediately and with direction. 2 seconds of silence from Deb was notable. "Copy that," she said. "Those old towers talk a lot at night. Let me know if it continues." It continued. July 25th, 2:47 a.m. The same sound, now at the third switchback, maybe 40 feet up, 12 feet below the catwalk, 12 feet below me. I did not go to the window this time. I lay on the cot with the flashlight in my hand and the sleeping bag pulled up to my chest, and I listened. The sound was clearer now, closer, and I could hear details I hadn't been able to hear before. It wasn't just the creak of weight on steel. Between the creaks, in the space where one step ended and the next began, there was a sound like friction, like something being dragged slowly across the grating, not a foot, not a paw, something wider, something that maintained contact with the surface as it moved, the way you'd move your palm across a textured wall. It lasted about 2 minutes. Then, it stopped. Not gradually this time. It stopped the way a person stops when they've reached the place they were going. And then there was a new sound. Or not a sound, exactly, a pressure. A sense of weight settling above me and below me simultaneously, as if the tower itself had taken a breath and was holding it. The sway from the wind didn't stop, but the rhythm changed, became slower, deeper, like the structure was accommodating something new, something that had changed its center of gravity. I lay there until dawn. I did not sleep. When the sun came up, I went out onto the catwalk and looked down and saw nothing. I circled the entire catwalk, looked at every section of the stairs, checked the underside of the cab where it met the steel frame. Nothing. No marks, no damage, no sign of anything. That morning I radioed Deb and told her I wanted to talk about the noises. "Go ahead," she said, and her voice was the same, as always, professional, slightly clipped. The voice of someone managing 16 things at once. I described what I'd been hearing, the timing, the progression, the way it moved higher each time. I tried to keep my voice neutral, to present it as a maintenance concern rather than a fear. When I finished, there was another pause. Longer this time, maybe 4 seconds. "Colin," she said, "are you sleeping okay up there?" "Yes." "Eating regular, drinking enough water?" "Yes." Isolation can do things to your pattern recognition, make you find patterns that aren't there. You've been up there 3 weeks with nobody to talk to. It's normal to start hearing things as more structured than they are. "I know that," I said. "I'm telling you what I heard." Another pause. "Copy. I'll make a note. If it gets worse, let me know and we'll get someone up there to do a structural check." I said, "Copy," and signed off. I sat at the firefinder for a long time after that, not scanning, just sitting. I was thinking about what Deb had said about pattern recognition, about isolation. She was right that isolation does things to you. I'd felt it already, the way the silence could become a texture, the way you started to feel the absence of other people as a physical sensation, like a change in air pressure. But I was also thinking about her pauses. The 2-second pause, and then the 4-second pause. Deb didn't pause. That was the thing. Deb never paused. I called Glenn at Dolly Sod's that afternoon, outside of the scheduled check-in times. We weren't supposed to use the radio for personal conversation during operational hours, but the rule was loosely enforced, and Glenn and I had developed a habit of checking in with each other in the early afternoon when the fire danger was low and the hours were longest. "Glenn," I said, "you ever get noises on your tower at night?" "What kind of noises?" "On the stairs, like something climbing." He didn't answer right away. I could hear the wind on his end, a slightly different pitch than mine. Dolly Sod's was more exposed, more windswept. When he answered, his voice was the same, but his cadence had changed. Slower, more careful. "Animals get on the stairs sometimes," he said. "Bears mostly. You can usually hear them breathing." "This isn't an animal." "How do you know?" I didn't have an answer for that. Or I did, but the answer, because it stops when it reaches a certain height and then just stays there, sounded insane when I tried to formulate it. "I just don't think it is," I said. "Okay," Glenn said. "Well, keep your door locked." The cab door had a lock, a simple deadbolt, the kind you'd find on a residential door. I'd never used it. The idea of locking a door 60 feet in the air had seemed absurd. That night, I locked it. July 28th, 2:47 a.m. I woke to the sound already in progress. It had skipped the lower stairs entirely. It was on the 3rd switchback, maybe the 4th, climbing steadily, and the sound was different now. Faster, not rushing, but purposeful. Like something that had learned the route and no longer needed to be cautious about it. I sat up in the cot and pulled the sleeping bag around my shoulders and watched the door. The cab door was on the north side, opening onto the catwalk, and in the moonlight I could see its outline clearly: the frame, the hinges, the deadbolt knob. The sound grew louder, closer. I could hear the individual steps now, each one a distinct metallic note, and between them that dragging friction, that wide sliding contact that I couldn't reconcile with any anatomy I knew. It reached the catwalk. I heard it. The sound changed from the ringing of the stair grating to the heavier, flatter sound of the catwalk decking, and then footsteps. Or not footsteps, that word implies. A pattern I could map onto something with legs. It was movement. Broad, distributed movement, like a heavy tarp being slowly dragged around the perimeter of the cab. It moved from the stairs to the north side, then west, then south. It was circling. The tower swayed differently. I want to be clear about this because it was the detail that made me certain I was not hallucinating. The tower had a known sway pattern. I'd felt it every night for 3 weeks. It swayed with the wind, east to west or west to east, depending on the direction, with a period of about 3 seconds. That night, while the thing circled the catwalk, the sway developed a secondary oscillation, a lateral wobble that ran perpendicular to the wind, syncopated against it, and the only way that happens is if there is moving weight on the structure that the wind isn't accounting for. I taught physics as well as math. I understood the mechanics. Something heavy was moving around the outside of the cab. It completed 1 full circuit, then a second. On the 3rd circuit, it stopped. It stopped at the door. I was sitting on the cot with the mag light in one hand and my other hand pressed flat against the wall behind me. The door was 6 feet away. The moonlight came through the windows and fell across the floor in silver rectangles, and the door was in shadow between 2 of them. I could hear the wind. I could hear my own breathing, and I could hear, on the other side of the door, a sound like someone leaning, not knocking, not scratching, not testing the handle, leaning. The way you lean against a wall when you're tired. A settling of weight against the surface, and then a very small sound, a creak from the door's hinges as the pressure increased fractionally and held. It stayed there until 4:12 a.m. I know because I watched my watch the entire time, counting the minutes as they passed, each one a small arithmetic of endurance. For an hour and 25 minutes, something leaned against the other side of my door while I sat on the cot and breathed as quietly as I could and did not move and did not speak and did not turn on the flashlight because I understood, in a way I could not have articulated, that acknowledging its presence through the door would constitute a kind of contact I was not prepared to make. At 4:12 it left, not down the stairs. That was the part that didn't make sense and continued not to make sense, no matter how many times I replayed it. It did not go back down the stairs. The weight simply redistributed. The tower's sway returned to its normal pattern over a period of about 10 seconds, as if the mass that had been pressing against the door was gradually becoming less rather than moving to a different location. It didn't climb down. It didn't jump. It was there. And then it was progressively less there. And then it was gone. And the wind was the only thing touching the tower. I didn't sleep. At dawn, I went out onto the catwalk with a kind of courage that was actually just exhaustion wearing the mask of bravery. And I looked at everything. The catwalk, the railings, the stairs, the door. I looked at the door for a long time. There were no marks on it, no scratches, no impressions, no residue, but the paint on the door frame, old white paint, cracked and peeling in places, had a section near the center, about chest height on a person, where the cracking pattern was different, where the cracks had been pressed closed, flattened, as if sustained pressure had compressed them back into the wood. A rectangle of smoothed paint about 18 inches wide and maybe 2 feet tall, the size and shape of something that had been leaning there for an hour and 25 minutes. I photographed it with my phone. The phone was useless for communication up there, but the camera worked. Looking at the photo now, you probably wouldn't see anything. It was subtle. The kind of thing you'd only notice if you knew the door, knew its topography, the way you know the face of someone you see every day. I radioed Deb. I told her something was climbing the tower at night, and I wanted a structural inspection and possibly a reassignment. "Colin," she said, "I can get maintenance up there next week. But reassignment, I don't have anywhere to put you. The other towers are staffed, and the ground crews are full." "Are you saying you can't do the job?" I understood what she was asking. In the Forest Service, saying you can't do the job is a specific administrative event with specific consequences. It goes in your file. It affects future assignments. For someone with 14 months of tenure and no other prospects, it was a door that closed in one direction. "I can do the job," I said. "Good. Keep your door locked. Stay inside after dark. If you see something, describe it to me and we'll figure it out." "I haven't seen anything," I said. "I've only heard it." The pause again. 3 seconds this time. "Right," she said. "Keep it that way." Keep it that way. I thought about that sentence for the rest of the day. Not as advice, as instruction. As if Deb knew that hearing it and seeing it were different categories of experience, and that the boundary between them was something I should actively maintain. The maintenance crew came on August 2nd. 2 men in a white Forest Service truck that took 40 minutes to crawl up the last 2 miles of road. Gary and someone whose name I don't remember, a younger guy who mostly carried tools and didn't talk. They spent 3 hours inspecting the tower from base to cab, checked every bolt, every weld, every connection plate, tapped the steel with a hammer, and listened to it ring. They found nothing wrong. The tower was structurally sound, all 60 feet of it. Gary came up to the cab afterward and sat at the table and drank water from a bottle and looked at me with the particular expression of a man who has been told to check for something without being told what. "Deb said you're hearing noises," he said. "At night, on the stairs, something climbing." He nodded. "These towers make noise, especially the old ones. Metal expands and contracts, and it can sound like damn near anything. It's not thermal expansion." "How do you know?" "Because thermal expansion doesn't circle the catwalk and lean against the door." Gary looked at me, then he looked at the door, then he looked back at me. "You want me to put a camera on the stairs?" he said. "Yes. He went down to the truck and came back with a trail camera, the kind hunters use, motion-activated, infrared for night shooting. He zip-tied it to the railing at the second switchback landing, aimed down the stairs, and tested the trigger by walking past it twice. "Memory card holds about 2,000 images," he said. "I'll come back in 2 weeks and we'll see what you got." He did not offer to stay the night. He and the other man drove back down the mountain, and I watched the truck's dust trail disappear into the spruce corridor, and then I was alone again. The camera changed something, not in a way I expected. Having it there, having a mechanical witness, an objective eye that would either confirm or deny what I was hearing, should have made me feel better. Instead, it made me feel observed. As if, by placing a device on the stairs to watch for the thing, I had announced to the thing that I was aware of it, that I was paying attention, that the relationship between us, whatever it was now acknowledged. I realize how that sounds. I was a math teacher. I know what anthropomorphization is. I know what projection is. But I also know what I felt. And what I felt was that the camera was not a solution, but a provocation. That night, August 2nd, nothing happened. No sound at 2:47, no sound at all. Just wind and the normal creaking of the structure and the distant sound of an owl somewhere in the spruce below. The same on August 3rd, and 4th, and 5th. Silence. Normal silence. The kind I'd loved during my first 3 weeks. I started to relax. I started to think maybe Gary's inspection had disturbed whatever animal had been using the stairs, or that the camera's infrared emitter was deterring it, or that Deb had been right and I'd been building a pattern out of random noise. On August 7th, I pulled the camera's memory card and checked it on my phone using an adapter I'd brought for exactly this purpose. 2,014 images. I scrolled through them. Every single image was of the stairs. Empty stairs at night, lit in the green-gray wash of infrared, timestamp after timestamp. The camera had been triggering all night, every night, taking photographs of nothing. I want to be precise about this. Trail cameras trigger on motion and heat. They have a passive infrared sensor that detects changes in thermal radiation within their field of view. An animal walking past. Or a person creates a heat differential that triggers the shutter. Wind doesn't trigger them. Rain can, sometimes. But these images were taken on clear, dry nights with moderate wind. The same conditions that had been present during the weeks when I'd heard the climbing. The camera had been triggering on something, but the something wasn't visible. I sat in the cab with the phone in my hand and scrolled through the images one by one. Empty stairs. Empty stairs. Empty stairs. 2,000 photographs of absence that the camera had mistaken for presence. And this was the thought that settled into me like cold water. 2,000 photographs of a presence that the camera could detect, but not depict. I put the card back in the camera. I didn't tell Deb. I didn't tell Glenn. I wrote in the journal, camera triggering but capturing nothing, every night, consistent with thermal anomaly moving through sensor field. I wrote thermal anomaly because I needed the language of explanation, even if the explanation explained nothing. I was still, at that point, trying to be rational, trying to be the math teacher who understood that the universe operates on consistent principles even when those principles produce results you weren't expecting. August 9th, 2:47 a.m. It came back. But it was different now. The sound on the stairs was the same. The metallic creaking, the friction between steps, but it moved faster than before. Not rushing. Efficient. Like something that had been practicing the route in the nights it was supposedly absent, and had optimized its approach. It reached the catwalk in what felt like less than a minute. And this time it didn't circle. It went straight to the door. The leaning started immediately. That same distributed pressure, that same creak from the hinges. But then a new sound. A sound that I have spent a long time trying to describe accurately, and I am going to do my best. Imagine you are in a room, and someone on the other side of the wall places their open palm flat against the surface, and then slowly, very slowly, drags it upward. The sound of skin on painted wood. A faint, dry, continuous whisper of contact. Now imagine that sound multiplied, not louder, but wider. As if It isn't one palm, but many. As if the entire surface of the door is being touched simultaneously by something that is learning the texture of it. It lasted about 30 seconds, then it stopped. And then the leaning resumed, but heavier now. The door flexed inward, not much. A millimeter, maybe 2, but I could see it in the moonlight. The slight bowing of the panel, the way the shadow along the frame changed shape, and then the handle moved. The deadbolt was engaged. The handle couldn't open the door, but it moved, rotated downward about 15 degrees, and held there. Not jiggling, not rattling. A slow, deliberate depression, as if the mechanism was being studied, being understood. I was standing by then. I don't remember getting off the cot. I was standing in the middle of the cab with the mag light in my hand, 6 feet from the door, watching the handle in the moonlight. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my wrists, in my neck, and behind my eyes. And my breathing was shallow and fast, and I was making a conscious effort to slow it down because I understood it again, in that inarticulable way, that my sounds were being listened to the same way I was listening to its sounds. That the door was not a barrier, but a membrane through which information was passing in both directions. The handle released. Slowly. Back to horizontal. The bowing in the door panel relaxed. The weight resettled. And then the thing leaned there for another 2 hours. I stood for the first 20 minutes. Then I sat on the cot. Then I lay down. Though I did not close my eyes, I lay on my back and stared at the ceiling and listened to the sound of weight against wood, and I waited. At 4:51 a.m., it left. The same way as before, not descending, not departing, just gradually reducing. A presence becoming an absence over the course of 10 or 12 seconds, like a tide going out. The next morning I did something I hadn't done before. I went down the stairs to the base of the tower and walked the perimeter of the ridge. I walked the trail to the equipment shed. I walked the faint game trail that led south along the ridgeline toward a saddle I'd never explored. I walked the north slope where the spruce started, dense and dark, even in full daylight. I was looking for anything. Tracks, broken branches, disturbed soil, scat, hair on bark, evidence, proof that something physical was living on or near this ridge and visiting the tower at night. I found nothing. The ridge was bare rock and thin soil and sparse grass, and nothing had disturbed any of it. The spruce below was a wall uniform, silent, impenetrable to the eye beyond about 15 feet. I stood at the edge of the tree line and looked into it and felt something I want to describe carefully. It was not the feeling of being watched. I've felt that before, the prickle, the neck-tightening awareness of eyes. This was different. This was the feeling of being next to something, the way you can feel another person in a dark room, even when they're silent and still. A displacement of space, a density. The spruce forest was 40,000 acres of unbroken canopy stretching to the south and west, and standing at its edge, I had the sense that it was not a collection of individual trees, but a single thing. A body. And I was standing on the body's highest point, and at night, something from inside the body came up to where I was and pressed against my door and learned the shape of the handle. I went back to the tower. I climbed the stairs, and every step felt different now, as if the structure itself had been recontextualized by what used it in the dark. I sat in the cab and radioed Deb and said I wanted out. Colin, I'm not saying I can't do the job. I'm saying I want a different assignment. There is no different assignment. I told you that. Then I want to go on record that something is coming up the tower at night. It's not an animal. The trail camera confirms anomalous thermal triggering, and I do not feel safe. The longest pause yet. 5 seconds. 6. Colin, listen to me. Spruce Knob has had a lookout every season since 1962. That's 60 years. Some of them have reported what you're reporting. The noises, the feeling of something on the stairs. It's in the file. I almost dropped the radio. It's in the file? There's a history of reports. It's not a safety issue. Nobody has ever been harmed. The noises happen. Some people hear them, and some don't. The people who hear them usually hear them for a few weeks, and then they stop. The noises stop, or the people stop reporting. Deb didn't answer that. Instead, she said, "The door holds. That's what I can tell you. The door has always held." I wanted to ask her what that meant. I wanted to ask her why the door mattered if the noises were just an artifact of isolation and thermal expansion in an overactive pattern recognition system. I wanted to ask her why a 60-year-old tower had a residential deadbolt on a door that was 60 feet in the air, but I could hear in her voice that she had given me everything she was going to give me, and that pushing further would move us from the category of professional conversation into something else. Something she was not willing to enter. "Copy," I said, and I stayed. The nights continued. Every 3 or 4 days, always at 2:47, always following the same progression. Stairs, catwalk, door. It never varied, it never escalated beyond the door. It came, it leaned, it explored the door's surface with that wide sliding touch. It tested the handle once, always the same slow, deliberate depression, and then it waited. And then it left. I adapted. Humans adapt to anything given enough time and enough repetition. I knew this from teaching, from marriage, from life. The fear didn't go away, but it changed from a spike to a plateau, from an event to a condition. I started sleeping through the arrival and waking only when the handle moved. I started timing the visits. I started noting details in the journal with the clinical detachment of someone conducting an experiment they happened to also be the subject of. August 14th. Arrival 2:47. Handle test 302. Departure 4:38. Duration 151. August 18th. Arrival 2:47. Handle test 2:59. Departure 4:55. Duration 2:08. August 22nd. Arrival 2:47. Handle test 2:54. Departure 5:10. Duration 2:23. The visits were getting longer. And the time between arrival and the handle test was getting shorter. Both trends were linear. I graphed them one afternoon on the back of a topo map, plotting the data points and drawing the trend lines, and the math was clean. Cleaner than it should have been. Natural phenomena don't produce perfect linear trends. Animal behavior is noisy, variable, subject to weather and hunger and 100 other inputs. This was a line. A function. Something was following a schedule, and the schedule was tightening. I calculated the convergence point, the day when the handle test would occur simultaneously with arrival, meaning whatever was climbing would reach the door and immediately try to open it, with no pause, no circling, no exploration, just arrival and entry as a single continuous act. September 14th. I had 3 weeks. I called Glenn. It was mid-afternoon, hot, the kind of late August day when the fire danger was highest and we were supposed to be scanning continuously. I didn't care. "Glenn, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me, honestly." "Okay." "Do you know what's on my tower at night?" Static, wind, the sound of Glenn's chair creaking as he shifted his weight. "I know what the old-timers say," he said. "Tell me." "They say the forest has a high point and a low point. The low point is the drainage bottoms, the creek beds, the places where water collects. That's where the forest is heaviest, densest, most itself, and the high point is the ridges, the balds, the places where the canopy breaks and the sky opens up. They say the forest doesn't like the high points, that the openness is, I don't know how to say this without sounding crazy, it's like a wound, a gap in something that's supposed to be continuous. And the towers are the worst because they're not just on the high points, they're above them. They stick up into space the forest considers its own, the canopy line. They penetrate the canopy line from above, even where the canopy isn't. That doesn't make sense. No. What does the forest do about it? They say it sends something up to close the gap, to seal it, to make the high point into a low point, to pull whatever's up there back into the canopy. What is it? Nobody knows. Nobody's seen it. The people who work the towers hear it on the stairs, and they either leave or they don't. And the ones who don't leave say it never gets in. Deb said, "The door holds. The door has always held." What happens on September 14th? Glenn didn't ask how I'd arrived at a date. He didn't ask what I meant. He was quiet for a long time, and when he spoke again, his voice was different, stripped of the careful, measured tone he'd been using. Raw. "I don't know," he said. "Nobody's ever stayed past mid-September." "The season runs through October?" "Nobody's ever stayed past mid-September, Colin." I understood. The season ran through October. The assignment ran through October. But every lookout who'd ever sat in a spruce knob cab had left before whatever was climbing the stairs finished its approach. Whether they were reassigned or quit or simply walked down one morning and drove away, they were gone before the convergence. "Did Deb know?" I asked. "Deb has run this district for 22 years. She's put someone in that tower every season. Some of them make it to September, and some don't. She's never had to find out what happens after September because nobody's been willing to stay." She didn't tell me. No, she doesn't tell anyone. She says if she told them, nobody would take the posting, and the tower has to be staffed. Fire doesn't wait for people to feel comfortable. I sat with the radio in my hand for a long time after Glenn signed off. The sun was lowering toward the western ridges, and the light was turning gold, and the shadows of the tower legs were stretching across the rock like long, dark fingers reaching east. I could see the spruce below, all of it, acres and acres of green-black canopy, motionless in the still air. I tried to feel angry at Deb. I couldn't. I understood her calculus. The tower needed a person. The person would hear the noises. The noises would drive the person out before the season was over. The tower would sit empty for the last few weeks, which was a risk, but an acceptable one, and the next year, she'd find someone else. The system worked. It had worked for 60 years. The door held, and the people left, and the forest was given back its high point every autumn, and in the spring, the cycle started again. I was a variable in her equation, a temporary presence, a value that would be substituted and then removed. The question was whether I would remove myself on schedule. I stayed. I need to explain why, because from the outside, it looks like recklessness or bravado, or the kind of stupid male stubbornness that fills hospitals and obituaries. It wasn't any of those things. I stayed because leaving would mean going back down. Back to the ground. Back to the district office, and the fuels crew, and eventually, inevitably, back to another classroom, or another cubicle, or another room with fluorescent lighting and industrial carpet, where I would become thin again, where the window Rachel had seen between us would thicken until I was completely on the other side of it, looking out at a world I could see but not touch. The tower was the first place I had ever been where the window wasn't there, where I felt present in my own life, continuous with the place I occupied. And yes, something was climbing the stairs at night and pressing against my door. But during the day, the sun came through the windows, and the hawks circled, and the wind moved through the spruce, and I was alive in a way I had not been alive in years. And I was not willing to give that up because a trend line pointed at a date. So I stayed. September came. The nights got cooler. The light changed the way it does in mountains in early autumn, sharper, more angular, the shadows harder edged. The fire danger dropped as the humidity climbed, and my scans became more relaxed, more meditative. I'd stand at the Osborne and sweep the horizon and see nothing but green and blue and gold, and the absence of smoke felt like the presence of safety. The visits continued. The durations lengthened. The interval between arrival and the handle test continued to shrink. My journal entries became shorter, more numerical, as if I were reducing the experience to its mathematical skeleton. August 30th. Arrival 247, handle 251, departure 522, duration 235, September 3rd, arrival 247, handle 249, departure 531, duration 244, September 7th, arrival 247, handle 248, departure 540, duration 253. On September 7th, the handle test was 1 minute after arrival, 1 minute to climb 60 feet of stairs, cross the catwalk, and reach the door. That was fast. That was very fast. And the departures were pushing later, closer to dawn, as if whatever was out there was becoming reluctant to leave. Or as if the process that caused it to fade, that gradual diminishment I'd felt each time, was taking longer. As if it was becoming more solid, more present, harder to undo. September 10th, 4 days before the convergence. I woke at 2:47, and the sound was already at the door. No stair noise, no catwalk crossing. It was simply there, as if it had been waiting on the catwalk before I woke, already in position, already leaning. The handle moved before I finished sitting up. And this time, this was new. The deadbolt shifted. Not much. A fraction of a turn. The kind of movement you'd feel rather than see, a vibration in the mechanism transmitted through the door to the frame, to the wall, to the cot, where my hand was braced against the surface. Something was applying rotational force to the deadbolt from the outside. Not enough to open it, but enough to demonstrate that it understood how the lock worked. I got up, I crossed the cab in 2 steps, I put my hand on the deadbolt knob and held it. And on the other side of the door, something pressed back, not against the knob, against the door, against the place where my hand was. I could feel it warmth. Not body heat, not the warmth of a living thing, but the warmth of the earth, of soil and direct sunlight, of a stone that has been baking all day and releases its heat slowly into the night. The door was warm, where something pressed against it from the other side, and the warmth spread outward from the point of contact like a stain. And I stood there with my hand on the deadbolt, and my palm flat against the warm wood, and I felt something I did not expect. I felt recognized, not watched, not hunted, not desired, recognized. The way you feel when someone who has been in the room with you for a long time finally turns and looks at you, and you realize they knew you were there all along. A mutual acknowledgement, a dropping of pretense. The door between us was the last formality, and we both knew it, and in that moment the door felt absurd. A 7-panel, wooden door between me and the largest living system on the visible earth. I almost opened it. My hand was on the deadbolt. My fingers were around the knob. The warmth was spreading up my wrist, and the recognition was so total, so complete, that the idea of maintaining the barrier felt like the cruelest thing I had ever done. Like holding a door shut against someone who loves you, someone who has been climbing to you every night for 2 months because you are the highest, most exposed, most alone thing in their entire body, and they want to bring you in. I did not open it. I don't know why. I wish I could tell you it was rational self-preservation or survival instinct or the memory of Deb saying, "The door holds." It wasn't any of those things. It was something smaller, a reflex. The same reflex that kept me on my side of the window for 6 years of teaching. The same reflex that kept me married for 3 years after the marriage was over. The reflex of not crossing, of staying where you are even when where you are is unbearable. Because the crossing is more frightening than the staying. I held the deadbolt until 5:44 a.m. The warmth faded. The presence faded. Dawn came through the east windows, and the door was just a door again, and I was standing in front of it with my hand cramped around the knob, my fingers white, and tears on my face that I didn't remember producing. I radioed Deb at 8 a.m. "I'm coming down," I said. "Okay," she said. No pause this time, no questions, just, "Okay." As if she'd been waiting for exactly this transmission on exactly this date, the way you wait for a result that confirms a hypothesis you've been running for 22 years. I packed my bag, I took the journal, I took the trail camera, I left the field guides and the topo maps in the sleeping bag. I walked down the 60 stairs for the last time, and each step sounded exactly the way it sounded when something else used them at night, and by the time I reached the ground, my hands were shaking. I drove down the 9 miles of washed-out road. I turned onto the paved highway. I drove to Mitchell and parked at the district office and walked inside and put the trail camera on Deb's desk. She looked at it. She looked at me. "Memory card's full," I said. 2,000 images. Empty stairs. Every night. She nodded. You knew, I said. I knew what the file says. The file says the tower has a history of acoustic anomalies. The file says no personnel have been harmed. The file does not say what you're about to say, it says. What am I about to say? You're about to say there's something in the forest that doesn't want the tower there and comes up every night to reclaim it. And I'm going to tell you that we don't staff towers based on what the forest wants. We staff them based on fire danger and budget allocation and personnel availability. And whatever is happening on that ridge at night has been happening for 60 years and has never once prevented the tower from serving its operational function. Nobody's ever stayed past mid-September. No, they haven't. What happens after mid-September? Deb picked up the trail camera and opened a drawer and put it inside. She closed the drawer. The tower sits empty until October 15th. Then we close it for the season. Maintenance goes up, winterizes the cab, and comes back down every year. And the maintenance crew. What do they find? Deb looked at me. She was 61 years old, and she had run fire operations in some of the most remote country in the eastern United States for more than 2 decades. She was not a person who frightened easily. But when she looked at me, her eyes were the eyes of someone who has made a decision she revisits every year and confirms every year and is never at peace with. They find the door open, she said. I left the Forest Service 2 weeks later. I moved to Martinsburg, which is in the eastern panhandle, flatland, no national forest for 50 miles in any direction. I took a job at a hardware store. I rented an apartment on the 2nd floor of a converted Victorian. I lived a life that was small and flat and safe and completely on my side of the window. That was 3 years ago. I haven't been back to the mountains. I haven't spoken to Deb or Glenn. I haven't gone above the 2nd floor of any building. I will not climb ladders. I will not use fire escapes. I stay low. I stay inside the canopy line, even in places where there is no canopy, because the canopy is not a physical thing. It's a boundary, a membrane between the place where you're part of the forest's body and the place where you're above it, exposed, visible, alone. But here's what I need to tell you. The reason I'm writing this, 3 weeks ago, I moved my bed. I'd had it against the east wall, same as the cot in the tower, and I moved it to the center of the room because I was rearranging to fit a bookshelf. That night, lying in the new position, I woke at 2:47 a.m. The apartment was silent. The street outside was silent. No wind, no sway, no metallic sounds. But the wall behind my headboard, the east wall, the wall my bed had been against for 3 years, was warm. Not the whole wall, a section, about 18 inches wide and 2 feet tall, chest height, the size and shape of something leaning. I put my hand against it. I held it there. And the warmth pressed back. The thing is, and this is what I can't stop thinking about, what I turn over in my mind every night when I wake at 2:47 and feel the wall, I'm on the 2nd floor. There's nothing on the other side of that wall but the outside of the building and a 12-foot drop to the sidewalk. Nothing should be able to lean against it from the outside, but something is. And it's warm. And last night, for the first time, I heard the handle on my apartment door move, slowly, deliberately, the way you test a mechanism when you already understand how it works and you're simply confirming that you remember. I don't know how it found me. I don't know how it climbed here to this place that has no tower, no stairs, no steel frame to sing against in the dark. I don't know if it followed me or if it was always here, and I simply wasn't high enough to notice. Maybe the 2nd floor is enough now. Maybe whatever boundary it used to respect has been lowered, or I raised myself above it that summer and can never get back below it. And the exposure I chose on that ridge marked me in a way that geography can't undo. I know this. The door, held for 60 years. The spruce knob door, held because people left before September 14th. And whatever happens on September 14th never had to happen because the tower was always empty by then. The system worked. The forest reclaimed its high point every autumn and relinquished it every spring, and the cycle continued, and nobody was harmed. But I held the deadbolt on September 10th. I put my hand against the door, and I felt the warmth and the recognition, and I almost opened it. Almost. And I think almost was enough. I think the recognition went both directions through the wood, and the thing on the other side of the door learned me the way it learned the handle. Understood my shape, my specific shape, the shape of a man who has been on the other side of a window his whole life, and who stood for one night with his hand on the only door that ever felt warm. I'm not going to open my apartment door tonight. I'm going to lie in bed and feel the warmth on the wall and listen to the handle move. And I'm going to keep the deadbolt turned. But I need you to understand something. The thing that the old-timers told Glenn about the forest wanting to close the gap, to pull the high points back into the canopy, I don't think they were right. I don't think it wants to close anything. I think it wants to reach. I think the towers were never wounds in the forest's body. I think they were the first time the forest had arms long enough to touch the sky, and it sent something up every night to practice. And now it doesn't need the tower, it just needs the door, and every door I've ever stood behind is the same height,